You've said, obviously, trying to kind of read the entire canon of literature is impossible. I mean, likewise, one could say that trying to kind of reconstruct some picture of what's been lost is equally impossible. So how on earth did you begin to frame this project?
It is impossible. And in a way, my Book of Lost Books is just one version of what the Book of Lost Books could be. And I quite like its sort of quantum instability for that reason. And if I were to write it again now, if I had lost the entire book, as nearly happened, I would have written a completely different version of it. What I did in each case was to try and find something that was either so typical that you could tell the whole life story, or something that was so atypical that it would overturn my conventions about the idea of the life. And so, in addition to that, when I sort of first set out how I was going to do this book, I thought, this is so vast, I'm going to need to put some constraints on it. So there's a kind of set of hidden structures behind the book, mostly derived from Georges Perec, who I write about at the end, the French Oulipo author. So although it's arranged chronologically, there is another way to go through the book where each entry will link you to another entry in some way. And in fact, the Perec entry, if anyone can actually send me a list of these, I'll give them a signed first edition. The Perec entry has one word from every other entry in the book in it, which wasn't forced. It actually happened quite naturally. And then sort of over and above that, I thought, well, if I'm going to play these games with it to sort of structure it, I'm going to have to write them in quite radically different styles. So, for each one I would choose a kind of style that I felt comfortable with applying to that author. And sometimes it was the fun of doing something almost perverse with it, to do Coleridge as comedy when he's one of the least funny writers that has ever put pen to paper kind of amused me at the time. That's a terribly lame justification, but it amused me at the time to do these things.
Now, as I was reading, I was aware that there was perhaps something even sadder than the loss of great works of literature. And you write about this in the context of Goethe, and that is when the works are preserved but are largely unread. And I know from personal experience, I've tried elective affinities twice, and I've never got beyond about page 15. And there are these sort of great monuments which are there, but sort of like unvisited museums are just gathering dust.
Yes, I mean, there is a kind of Buddhist koan behind it that if a book isn't read, does it exist at all? I think we're in a kind of peculiar point in our culture at the moment that so much of the great literature is slightly sidelined. I mean, I remember the old days where bookshops would have acres of classics, and year on year, and particularly in sort of slightly more aggressive book retailers, that's been cut back and cut back and cut back. And it's not just the classics that suffer from this. I remember going to try and get the backlist of Nicola Barker when she was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. And books that were only 8, 10 years old now disappear. You have to get them from libraries or order them off the internet, which I absolutely detest doing. And with people like Goethe's a magisterial figure. Everyone should read Goethe in some ways. But for various reasons, they become suspect. They're seen as elitist. And the unread book is an incredibly sad thing. It's why I've written about Walter Scott for my new book, because you don't get much more unread than Walter Scott.
Well, you write about the sort of terminus of his career, the Siege of Malta, which I love the description of that book. You said it's a prose poltergeist lingering in the world of the living. So say a bit about that book.
It was the book which Scott was writing on his final trip around Europe, where he'd been sent by the doctors to try and recover. He'd had a number of strokes. He was an extremely ill man. He tried to keep on writing, even though he couldn't remember each day what he'd written the last day. The novel was actually published recently. Edinburgh University has been doing this great project to re-edit all of Scott, and they published The Siege of Malta and Il Bizzarro, which is great for academics. It should have a big sticker on it that says, for academic use only. If anybody picked up that and thought, I know, I'll read a Scott, I'll read The Siege of Malta, they'd think this is just absolute drivel.
Not to be taken internally.
You can see these sort of strange flashes of the brilliance that Scott had. He kind of toys with the idea of having Cervantes as a character in it, which could have been great if he'd been a well man. But, it's a very, very sad book. It's what happens when he really didn't have the mental ability to write anymore, but felt he had to, for all the reasons of paying back his creditors, getting out of debt, a sense of obligation to his public.
What about the ethics of preserving the works of an author who has asked for those works to be destroyed? I mean, Kafka is a sort of locus classicus of this. What's your sort of take on that?
It's a really difficult one. If I'd been Max Brod, I wish I could have been brave enough to burn the Kafka novels. There are things more important in life than books, and I suppose friendship is the key one there. Of course, it's wonderful we have those books. I have this lingering sensation that he knew just how fearful his visions were. I'm not sort of positing anything supernatural or predictive about his books, but he was writing them to hurt himself and to hurt other people. The more recent example of this has been the publication of the original of Laura, Nabokov's lost book, which I think that actually it reduced Nabokov for me. The other great example is the complete text of The Wasteland, Eliot's poem, which, when I read The Wasteland when I was 16 or 17, it was, it opened my eyes to what contemporary poetry could be. And then when you see the full manuscript and see what else he was writing, it's kind of drivel. There's lots of it is really just not that good, and Ezra Pound deserves some kind of get-out-of-purgatory free card, despite his latter behaviour, just for putting a blue pencil through pages of it. From the sort of point of view of biography, it's great to know everything. From the point of view of reading, there is a quality of dilution that's possible. I don't particularly want to know Philip Larkin's mucky limericks to enjoy Aubade or High Windows.
But do you think as a culture, in general, we are prurient and curious about those things?
I think we are, and there's a sort of strange enigma in all this, that we think that what was reserved must be the most private and internal parts of it, whereas what was actually given was what was important. Now, I think one of the truest things ever said is that there's no such thing as a good unedited book. We have to respect that the edited form is the form that goes out into the world. And personally, I found it quite dispiriting seeing authors like Hemingway, authors like Raymond Carver, being presented, as it were, before they've had a chance to comb their hair. There's all sorts of reasons about literary estates and who controls the estates, which lead to these rather grubby little encounters. But, if you look at the Carver story, which Lish edited, that the New Yorker published, it is 100 times better because Lish put a blue pencil through pages. And it reduces Carver to an extent to see him where he still had to show his working.